The small town of Applewood was named for the hundreds of apple trees planted by its founder, Jedediah Blackwood, and not as many newcomers assumed, for the abundant wood industry. Over the years, the town's population had dwindled. Most of the younger folks had left long ago, taking their energy and ambition with them. Those who stayed behind cherished the peace and quiet that came with the territory. Eli Thompson, whose family had been in Applewood for 5 generations, was one of those people. He liked his garden, his solitude, and the friendly nods he exchanged with the few neighbors he passed on his daily dog walks. His days were slow and simple, his nights filled with the low hum of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. In the daytime, he spent most of his time in his well-stocked shed tinkering with broken clocks or restoring old furniture. The rest of the time he spent outside tending his large garden, which supplied him with most of the food he ate. It wasn't always this way, however. For most of his life, he'd been an adventurer, traveling the world, seeing new places, meeting interesting people. He collected so many trinkets on his travels that he had to rent storage space to keep them all. Now, however, most of his mementos were kept in a locked chest in his house. Most of them, except for the collection of smooth river stones he kept on a shelf next to his workbench. He picked one up and turned it over in his hands, a frown creasing his forehead. He couldn't remember where he'd found this particular stone, though he knew he must have thought it pretty special at the time, or he wouldn't have kept it all these years. He sighed, knowing perfectly well that no amount of turning and twisting would dredge up the memory. Farmers, he said to himself with a smile, are supposed to have dirt under their fingernails, not stones. That's when he heard the sound that made him stop dead in his tracks. Footsteps at first. He thought he was mistaken. No one ever came into his yard unless they were invited. He stepped out the back door and listened intently. They were definitely coming from the far corner of his property, near his vegetable garden. Maybe it was just a stray dog, he thought. Or maybe it was just the wind. Still, curiosity got the better of him, and he walked slowly toward the sound. As he got closer, he could hear the footsteps more clearly now. Whoever was out there was walking right toward him. He peeked over the fence and nearly jumped out of his skin. Standing in front of him was a young woman, her arms full of what looked like freshly dug potatoes. She turned, catching sight of him, and smiled sheepishly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just saw all your vegetables growing so lushly, and I couldn't help myself. Would you mind if I took just a couple?" Before Eli could respond, she had scrambled over the fence and was gone. Eli stood there dumbfounded. Since he'd moved to Applewood 20 years ago, he'd had it with the local deer eating all his vegetables. Just last year, they'd nearly wiped out his entire potato harvest. So he'd been planning to put up a fence for months now. He shook off his surprise at the brazen young woman and went back inside to get his shovel. The soil was damp, the air smelled of rain, and he hummed as he worked. He dug 2 holes, then 3, then 4. Midway through digging his 4th hole, his shovel struck something hard with a dull clang. At first, he thought it was just a rock, yet as he cleared away more dirt, he saw the sharp corner of something man-made. A few minutes later, he had uncovered a small rust-stained metal box with a latch. His heart beat a little faster. It wasn't locked. Hands trembling slightly, he opened the lid. Inside was a clear plastic bag stuffed with cash. He pulled one out and quickly counted. Each stack held $1,000, and there were at least 30 stacks. He whistled softly. $30,000, just sitting under his garden. But that wasn't all. Beneath the bag of cash lay an envelope. Inside was a faded photograph of 2 men in work clothes, standing in front of a red barn that Eli didn't recognize. One of them was smiling broadly, the other had a serious expression. Tucked with the photo was a note written in careful block letters. "If you're reading this, it means I never came back. This money was not mine to begin with, but I hoped one day it would do some good. Find the barn in the picture. The truth is waiting there." Eli sat back on his heels, the spring air suddenly colder. Who were these men? Why hide the money here? And what truth could be waiting in a barn, from a photograph that looked at least 50 years old? He looked out over his half-finished fence, then down at the box again. The garden could wait. He needed answers. He walked back to the house, got his truck keys, and headed out into the countryside, the photograph clutched in his hand. The search proved frustrating. Eli drove past apple orchards and farms, past fields of corn and wheat, and finally to the outskirts of town, where the pavement ended and the road became a rough dirt track. An hour later, his shoulders slumped with disappointment. He hadn't seen any barns that looked like the one in the photo, not one. He was about to turn back when he spotted a weathered wooden sign pointing to a dirt road barely wide enough for his truck. The road wound through tall trees until it opened into a small clearing, and there in the center was a barn painted a bright, cheerful red, just like the one in the photograph. What if the truth was something he didn't want to know? Slowly, he got out of his truck, walked to the side of the barn, and pushed open the heavy sliding doors. Inside was pitch black. Holding his breath, he stepped inside. The air was stale, smelling of dust and decaying wood. Then he saw, in the corner, bathed in a shaft of sunlight that pierced through a hole in the roof, was a small wooden box. He hurried toward it, his heart pounding. Was this the box from the photograph? He knelt down beside the box, ran his fingers over its worn surface, and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed linen, was a single sheet of paper. On it was printed the same careful block letters from the note. There are things in this world that we don't understand, but we can still try to comprehend. My brother Samuel believed this to be true. He also believed that burying this money would ensure that it would someday do some good. Find Samuel's grave, and in time, you will find the answer you seek. Eli read the words twice, then looked around the barn, his eyes searching. Where was Samuel buried? Then he noticed something odd. The boards on the floor didn't quite line up in this corner. He knelt down and pressed his fingers against the uneven boards. They gave way slightly. He pressed harder, and the corner of the floorboard creaked ominously. He pressed, and a board tilted, revealing a dark hole beneath. He reached for a shovel. He brushed off the dirt and checked to make sure no one was watching. Then he started to dig. He didn't have to dig very deep before his shovel hit something solid. He brushed away the dirt and saw the outline of a coffin. Carefully, he cleared away the rest of the dirt, revealing the weather-beaten wood of the coffin. He traced the inscription carved into the lid and read aloud, Samuel Blackwood, 1924-1957. So this was Samuel's grave. But what could possibly be buried with him? He knelt down beside the grave and, taking a deep breath, began to dig. When he pried open the coffin, all that was inside was a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully and read the faded ink. If you're finding this, my time has run out. Look for the initials ST hidden somewhere near where I am laid to rest. Whoever finds the treasure must use it to do good in the world. May God bless you and keep you safe. Signed, Samuel. The initials ST didn't mean anything to Eli, but he knew where Samuel was buried. The logical place to look for whatever ST stood for was in the barn itself. But where would he have hidden it? Glancing down at the coffin, Eli noticed the brass hinges. They were old and slightly tarnished, but they did indeed have initials engraved on them. Only they weren't ST, they were ET. Eli felt a sudden chill. There, wedged between the coffin and the wall, was a loose stone. He pushed it aside and brushed away the dirt, revealing a small hole. He reached in and pulled out a metal box. When he opened the box, he found another smaller box inside. Eli lifted the lid and peered inside. Nestled on a bed of velvet was a silver locket. On the back was an engraving of two intertwined hearts with the letters ST underneath. He hesitated, then opened the locket. Inside were two tiny photographs. One showed a young boy with a gap-toothed grin, the other a young girl with pigtails and a mischievous smile. The girl and the boy in the photographs must have been the children of the two men in the older photograph. Underneath the photographs was a small piece of paper with the date 1948 written on it. Suddenly, it all made sense, and Samuel must have been the brother of their father. So the money wasn't buried treasure, but rather a legacy meant to be used for good. And as Eli stood there looking out over the peaceful countryside, he knew exactly what he wanted to do with it. That's the end of this story. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.